Strength, discipline, protection. Now imagine those forces mobilized not for war, but as a regional shield, standing by, ready to respond to crisis before they spiral out of control. ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, has taken a bold step in introducing a standby military force. But what does this really mean for West Africa? Is it a game changer for regional stability or a move fraught with challenges? In this episode, we dive deep into the implications of this decision, its potential, its risks, and what it signals for the future of security and sovereignty in West Africa. Let's get into it. Stay tuned. My name is Josie Mahachi. Welcome to Africa Link, the podcast that connects you to the stories that matter from Africa.
Africa Link, every weekday here on DW.
Nigeria's Defense Minister Mohammed Badaru warns that terrorism and banditry know no borders. ECOWAS believes an attack on one member state is an attack on all. However, critics argue that the ECOWAS Free Movement Protocol makes it easier for criminals to operate across borders. With the introduction of the ECOWAS standby force, can the regional security be strengthened? To discuss this, we are joined by Nigerian lawyer Kajit John Bagu, CEO of the Foundation for the Movement for Cognitive Justice, and DW correspondent in Abuja, Ben Adam Shemang. Hello and welcome to the Africa Link podcast. I will start with you, Dr. Bagu. Exactly what does this ECOWAS standby force mean? What is it all about?
Well, it is a force, experts, military personnel, and I would want to believe on ground, in the air and in the sea, specially designated to tackle, in this case, terrorist forces that cross between one country into another. And the aim is to build the capacity for rapid response and reaction to tackle cross-border terrorism. And it's quite widespread in the West African sub-region. The challenges that may be there perhaps may not be unrelated with the developments that have to do with Niger, Burkina Faso, and what's the other country? The third country. The three countries that have formed their own alliance, cutting away from the ECOWAS body. Because there has to be some form of understanding, some protocol that will enable engagement between these. Because you see, those three countries constitute more than half of the landmass of West Africa. So in essence, that's what this standby force is all about.
Right. The third country would be Mali there, Dr.
Yes,
Bagu. But all this is also happening when there is tension between DRC and Rwanda. Would you think that that could also be a reason?
Yes. In fact, the recent invasion of the DRC by the M23, allegedly supported by Rwanda, was quite a disaster. You see, the South African organization forces that were there seemed so helpless. SADC, the SADC intervention force, they seemed so helpless. It was, in fact, a national disgrace for South Africa because the M23 group was so well armed. They came in such with such resolute force that it was practically impossible to stop them. They captured the entire city. So this should be, a warning. I believe that West Africa is taking notes from what's happening over there in taking this bold step. But the issue of concern here is, how is this going to be financed? You could see how the soldiers from South Africa were complaining that they were not well equipped and so on. Now, in the case of West Africa, with the budget of $200 billion, thereabouts, I don't know how this is going to be financed, particularly when you look at the records of the countries involved, including Nigeria. There are lots of complaints about the equipment, the kind of equipment you need to tackle such forces, which seem to be well armed, especially when you look at the Sahel area. You have to contemplate Do these countries have the capacity to fund and get up-to-date equipment that will be able to counter these forces that, cross borders? Africa, of course, with the age-long problem of borders, the colonial borders we inherited, put artificially, in spaces that people have always traversed without hindrance. It didn't stop people from crossing. So these forces, the Islamic terrorist forces, they don't have respect for borders. They come in with sophisticated weapons. And it is, we hope, that's part of one of the issues that the chief of defense staffs of the countries of ECOWAS are going to have to tackle in their meetings. The issues of logistics, equipment and financing of the operation. So, these are challenges that I believe they cannot escape looking at.
Now, speaking of ECOWAS leadership, the president obviously is also the Nigerian president, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, and we had Boko Haram crisis for years in Nigeria. And I'm just wondering the capacity that ECOWAS would have, and why didn't this happen when Nigeria was really in problem with Boko Haram so much that time?
Well, you see, there are a number of possible theories to think about here. We cannot quickly forget the nearly desperate efforts of France to get West Africa to somehow intervene in Mali, which of course did not happen. And so you must wonder, is it possible that there is a foreign donor or a foreign interest that may have, its own national or other interest in propping the West African body to set up this force, maybe with an understanding that we are going to help you with equipment, with intelligence, with finance. And then we have an understanding that you will help us push for something. These are issues to consider. But because, like you have rightly observed, Nigeria still has its own challenges with terrorists. Even though significant progress has been made, thanks to the commitment of the service chiefs, particularly the chief of defense staff, we still cannot turn our eyes away from the threats that are still present. The fact remains, Nigeria is still facing its own challenges. So I would want to believe that there would be some sort of support coming from another country. But my hope is that the national interests of the member states of ECOWAS and the region as a whole will not be compromised, maybe in exchange for some interests in the minerals or other resources of the continent at the expense of the continent itself. So it is curious. It's something for investigative journalists to look into and see what is really happening. How is it that Nigeria did not, or rather West Africa did not come up with this idea when Nigeria was in dire need? But now it is suddenly, and remember, the AES countries have set up their own force of 5,000. It's the same number as what West Africa is putting together in this force. So one wonders, is it a competition or is it a genuine intervention?
Right. Now, speaking of journalism, just to turn to our correspondent on the ground, Ben Adam Shemang, just to give us an overview of when this was announced, the ECOWAS standby force, how the local media took this, including also Nigerians at large. What was the reaction like?
Yes, it is always a kind of a divide. Some are for it, some are not for it. But those who are for it will always remember that when there were the wars in Liberia and Sierra Leone, of course, ECOWAS came out with what they call ECOWAS Monitoring Group, ECOMOG. And that agency or that military body was able to do a nice job, and that ensured democracy in Sierra Leone, democracy in Liberia. But again, people are worried that the days of ECOMOG, virtually that Nigeria bore the financial burden, military men, officers were killed in that process. And today, again, there is the call for a standby force. Is it going to be the same thing that these ECOWAS member nations will just simply say, okay, they have a big father, a big uncle, big brother Nigeria. As usual, Nigeria will take the front. But when you also look at the argument of security experts, they say if you are able, like we have the multinational joint task force, this is based in N'Djamena, the Chad. Remember former President Muhammadu Buhari, who will always say that with the fall of Gaddafi or Libya not having a stable government, many of the small weapons and small guns and light weapons infiltrated into Nigeria through from Libya, Niger, and Chad into Nigeria. So with the multinational joint task force having headquarters in N'Djamena, that was a kind of controlled. So if we have this kind of a standby force, according to them, they'll be able to nip them in the bud as fast, as quickly, and as possible.
And who's consisting of this standby force, Ben? Which countries? Is it every ECOWAS country, West African country sending in some of their soldiers to form this, or how exactly is it put together?
In this case, all the member countries of ECOWAS will contribute their troops. They're proposing about 5,000 of them. And like some people will say, it's really not about the number, it's about them being well equipped, well trained, and all that stuff. But the answer remains all the countries of ECOWAS will have to contribute troops.
Right. Now, to just come back to you, Doctor, looking at this standby force, Nigerians are complaining everything is expensive. There is no money in the country. And now this again. Who's going to bear the cost of this standby force, in your opinion?
Well, honestly, the temperature of, when you talk about standard of living, the capacity to even survive is really tough in the country right now. The government will tell you that they are doing well, they are making a lot of revenue, they are stabilizing the economy, they have removed the regulatory frameworks that stopped the flow of things. But the masses really cannot see it. So it's possible the government has the money to buy sophisticated weapons and intelligence networks and the things necessary to equip these forces. However, the reality remains, it could become a subject matter for concern. And because it's getting to a point where people are beginning to take to social media, including people in the employment of government. Last week, a lady, a youth couple undergoing national service, came online in Lagos, and she was calling the president the worst, a terrible person, because she went to buy a crate of eggs. Prices had gone up again. She cannot do anything with her income. She only pays bills, and she practically broke down, and it raised a lot of concern across the country. It served as a trigger for people to come out and speak up. However, of course, the argument is always there. Security comes first. So the government has to do some serious balancing act. And back to the issue of, just 5,000 forces, where are they coming from? Where are they going to be concentrated? You see, the politics of international security and intervention is always more effective with smaller countries. When you remember Gambia, for example, when Jammeh did not want to leave office, it took almost just the threat of intervention by ECOWAS forces for him to leave. For a bigger country, it would be almost inconceivable to think of intervening. So look at the borders between all the countries in West Africa, the 15 countries, including the 3 that have left. The security architecture has to consider which countries have porous borders where these terrorist elements move from one jurisdiction to another, from one international boundary, cross international boundaries. So 5,000 forces, well, I'm not going to go into the logistics and the specifics. That's for the experts in the field. But I want to believe that in the end, these forces will be quite few in each station, but they will need to be very powerfully equipped and then work in collaboration with the local militaries of each country. Not just that, but also possibly the domesticated vigilante networks in the areas.
But yeah, obviously the standby force is not only for Nigeria, it's also for West Africa. Ben, what does then the standby force mean to the ordinary West Africans in their daily lives in the region?
Yeah, you see, other West African nationals were actually, like we've seen some signs in Niger Republic. You know, when there was this military coup, the military junta just called the bluff and said they will have nothing to do with ECOWAS. And in fact, they were interested in just saying, block anything Nigerian. Well, you can now see that because of lack of petrol in in Niger in particular, they are crying back to Nigeria. And that is why people are now saying, look, the standby force in Niger, for example, they will believe that anything that will affect Nigeria will affect Niger. Anything that will affect Benin Republic will affect Nigeria. And therefore, the Yorubas in these borders along Benin, Nigeria are seeing themselves as one. If you come to Niger, you see that the Nigerians there and the Nigerians too, who are also in Nigeria, are seeing themselves as one. Therefore, they feel that the standby force will assist should there be any crisis. So that is just the story.
And Dr. Bagu, honestly, talking about these three countries, you started by addressing that when you started talking Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. But as we can see, this is one big family. And I don't know how this is going to work, honestly, because they've pulled out of ECOWAS. ECOWAS comes up with this plan of a special force, and they are part of the Sahel countries. So isn't that going to have an adverse effect on the goals of the standby force? Are they going to be fighting together or fighting against each other?
These three countries have already set up their own standby force of exactly 5,000 men, just like what the rest of West Africa is also proposing 5,000. And you see, those countries occupy such a large area that the forces that are being targeted make use of those territories a lot. So there is no way we can avoid interface between the rest of West Africa and these three countries. So Nigeria, in particular, shares a long border with Niger Republic, and it is from that axis that many of these hostile forces come into Nigeria, and when they are being pursued, they run back. So I believe there has to be some diplomatic engagement that will create the avenue for military cooperation, sharing of intelligence, and ultimately, of course, I know West Africa ultimately wants those three countries to go back to democracy and come back into the West African fold. But with the declaration recently made, forming their own group, and the call for decolonization, I believe it's still a long way to go. And we must not forget this fundamental factor in this quest, in the struggles of these three countries. I don't see an easy way back along the same colonial paradigm which they have fought so hard to discard. The existing framework is based on colonial concepts. So the capacity to tackle security challenges based on the existing framework is grossly limited in as much as it is not indigenously generated. You have so many ethnic groups that see themselves as the same, but you see some are in French countries, French Borgu and English Borgu, for example, in Niger State, the same ethnic group. And you find a large number of them across various countries, cross-border. So the borders of Africa, being unnatural, were drawn arbitrarily, creating the room for any security effort to tackle such problems to be limited. So at a deeper level of research, some of us have proposed the need to re-examine Africa's political maps. But I know this is a bigger question. I'm not going to go into that. But for now, I would stop by saying that there is a need. In fact, it is impossible to avoid engaging these three countries, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger.
Right. Now, Dr. Bagu, well said, and I wish we could actually touch on some of your researches there. But then just to find out from you what you think should be the immediate areas the force should pay attention to as it comes into existence.
Well, I would say that the Nigerian security agencies have already demonstrated some goodwill in cooperating with Nigeria at the borders. So I would want to say that they should make it a point of priority not to emphasize the need or preconditions requiring those countries to rescind some serious political and diplomatic steps they have taken as a prerequisite for engaging in security measures aimed at checking these terrorist groups, because that would be a red flag. It could signify that, look, these West African countries are only playing that, acting out the agenda of somebody else that is funding them to try and target the diplomatic and political position and direction that these countries are taking. So minimize those aspects, because these countries, they have taken charge of their uranium, natural resources, kicked out France, and they can now see the benefits. It will be difficult for them to easily go back, they're already accusing the rest of West Africa of being chained colonially and still following the colonial master. So let the security that is the main objective of this undertaking be the primary objective. Let the military and security objects be priority over any other political consideration. The security of the people living in border communities, sharing, this will create room for sharing intelligence more easily, engaging with the armed forces of the other countries despite the political rates that currently exist. That's the simple way I would like to put it right now.
Right. Now, Ben, as we wrap up our discussion, you have covered and reported conflicts and wars across the West African region. Please give us an insight on some of the challenges this standby force might encounter.
Yes, to start with, language is a problem. You know, we still have this Anglophone thing, we have the Francophone, we even have the Lusophone, kind of. So you have three different languages doing deployments. Now, who is the commander and what language will he be using? That is one the problem. The other one has to do with money. Who is contributing this money? Where is it coming from? Are these countries going to depend on what they usually call the international partners, the UN, America, EU, and the rest of them? Apart from that, you also have the environment itself. The environment in which you fight the war matters. You have to also design the uniform to fit the environment. Where you have desert, you have the camouflage or the camo that must tally all the boots that you want to use. They must tally with the environment. It's like the chameleon that will always change its color to fit the environment, and that entails money. Now, if you're talking about any bullet fired, any, that is dollars, so to speak. Then you look at the entire landmass with just a little number of 5,000 troops. What can they really do? In a country like Nigeria, not to talk of Niger that is so large, not to talk of Burkina Faso that is so large. You look at Mali again, very, very large. So what will 5,000 troops actually do? Then you're talking about real commitment. I do remember when ECOWAS was first formed, the first commander or field commander was called General Arnold Quaino from Ghana. It was like he was not too used to commanding or whatever it was. And that was as Samuel Doe was caught and just butchered by Yomi Johnson. So we're talking about the mastery, the act, the ability to command troops, and those troops begin to obey. So these are very many problems apart from feeding. Feeding is real. There has to be food. Apart from that, you also have the health aspect of it. We're talking about a situation, this dry season, we're talking about meningitis that is common within those that region, the Sahelian region. So how do they come out of this? It's a very big issue, big challenge that ECOWAS will have to monitor before they act.
Nigerian lawyer Kajit John Bagu, CEO of the Foundation for the Movement for Cognitive Justice, and DW correspondent Ben Adam Shemang in Abuja. Many thanks for joining us. ECOWAS is not the only regional bloc with a standby force. The Economic Community of Central African States, ECCAS, also has one that focuses on peace, security, and humanitarian missions in Central Africa. And let's not forget the Eastern African Standby Force, EASF. It is part of the Eastern African Community and has made significant strides in integrating military, police, and civilian components. Now, while all these forces aim to enhance regional security, the ECOWAS Standby Force is mainly focused on addressing coups and extremism in West Africa. Experts, however, warn that it still faces challenges in rapid deployment and modern armaments. That's it for this edition of Africa Link. Remember, you are not just a listener, but a crucial part of our community, and your engagement can shape the direction of our discussions. We value your insights and encourage you to share your thoughts with us. You can find all of the Africa Link podcast episodes on Spotify and Apple or wherever you get your podcasts from. This episode was co-produced and edited by Eddie Micah Jr. My name is Josie Mahachi. Thanks for listening. Until the next one, it's bye for now.
DW News.
Here are today's top news stories and why they matter. South Sudan's main opposition party said its leader, Riek Machar, has been arrested. Opposition spokesperson Paul Maideng said in a video addressed to the media on Wednesday night that Machar was in confinement by the government and his life was at risk. Why does this matter? The UN warned on Monday that the country was teetering on the edge of a renewed civil